Old picture of the church?
Not that old because it has our sign up there.
But it has grass.
Oh, the church doesn't normally have grass? Well, there you go.
Hi, Don. I understand you have books for me. Hi, Pastor.
I put them in the car so I wouldn't forget them.
Okay.
Are you staying for the meeting? If not, I'll go get your books.
You can bring them back later. I don't want to interrupt.
Okay.
I'm going to go see Eola, so no, I'm not staying for the meeting. She's leaving. She's being discharged.
Good to see you.
She's
Okay.
being discharged at 3. You know that? Frank's going over to pick her up. Well, then I won't go see her. I'll go to good home. But I'll go and get something to eat. God bless you all.
Okay.
And
You're smiling. I like that.
You look more relaxed.
Yeah, I just picked that picture up. I thought that was a good picture of the church. Maybe it's not. I could have tinted it brown so the grass was dry.
It's just fine.
Okay. Well, I thought we'd have more people here. Maybe we should have had it in a smaller meeting, but that's fine. You'll be able to see the slides. Let's pray as we begin. Dear Lord, thank you for the time we could spend together talking about your work and moving it forward. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay. The need. The reason we have a need is the current structure in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The structure is that the pastor is in charge of almost everything. He's the appointed leader. He's a spiritual leader, shepherd of the flock, chairman of the board, visionary, and then he's a large influence in the allocation of funds because he influences people and tells them we need to do this, we need to spend this money. And that's good and bad, and I'm going to talk about that. The problems with this particular system is that pastors change every few years. And pastors also have different gifts and different talents. Some have a gift for administration and money, others don't. Currently, pastors have very little, if any, education in business management or financial training by the seminary or the conferences. I'm working to try and change that. I've made a proposal to this conference to train all the pastors in the conference and give them some insight into finances, because I've had some disasters where they come in and destroy churches for 6 months, spend all their money, then take call someplace else. And I think that's atrocious. I don't think they should be doing that. Guiding principles. The Bible has a lot to say about having a vision. Where there's no vision, the people perish. Where there's no counsel, the people fall. In the multitude of counselors, there's safety. And that deals with the local church leaders have to be involved, not just be yes people that say yes to everything the pastor said. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to undermine the influence of pastors, but I'm trying to say have a voice and care about what is done in your church. Without counsel, purposes are disappointed. The multitude of counselors, they are established. And then there's the principle of the resurrection of Lazarus. In the story of Lazarus, Jesus arrives in Bethany, and Lazarus has been dead already for 4 days, according to the Bible. Jesus comforts the family, and he interacts with them. And then he asks, "Where have you laid him?" And they invite him to come and see. And then this is the critical part of the story for us and a principle for finance, and that is that Jesus, when he comes to the tomb, he turns to the people that are there and he says, "Roll away the stone." Jesus doesn't do it himself. Why doesn't he remove the stone? Well, if you look in Desire of Ages about that, Ellen White has some things to say about it. Page 535, she says, Christ could have commanded the stone to remove and it would have obeyed his voice. He could have bidden the angels who were close by his side to do this. At his bidding, invisible hands would have removed the stone. But it was not to be taken away by human hands. It was not, somehow it's not on widescreen. It was not to be taken away by human hands. Thus Christ should show that humanity is to cooperate. Was to be taken away by human hands. Christ would show that humanity is to cooperate with divinity. What human power can do, divine power is not summoned to do. Sometimes people think, well, I need a new job. I'll pray and God will send the address tomorrow in the mail. Doesn't work that way. You have to go out and put in applications and pound the pavement. When you've done all you can do, then God blesses you and guides you to the right place. God does not dispense with man's aid. He strengthens him, cooperating with him as he uses the powers and capabilities given to him. Each one of us has to use the God-given talents that we have and not just pray and hope God will do something.
What a compliment.
Huh?
What a compliment that God would want to.
God will work through us. That means that we have to use our God-given talent, our brains, to think things through and say, this doesn't sound like a good plan. The Bible encourages us to plan ahead for many different things. The second coming, our life, and everything we do. And there are many verses that say that. I could go on and on for a long time about that. I'd like to talk about the blessings that I've personally experienced from God because they give us an idea about how to deal with finances. This is a list of churches that I've served in for the last 30 or 40 years. Founding pastor, Desert Hot Springs, El Cajon, Conference Evangelist, Springdale, Arkansas, Monterey Church, and then here as an elder. So I'm going to focus on each one a little bit. Founding pastor, Desert Hot Springs Church. That's out near Palm Springs. We started with the branch Sabbath school and 3 families that were meeting in a garage with $500 in the checkbook. And we bought this old theater building in the center of town. Now, we looked at many different buildings. We were spending about $500 a month, maybe $600 a month, to rent a trailer. We rented from the Baptist church for a while. And then we decided to start looking for our own building. And we looked at an old spa up on top of the hill in Desert Hot Springs. When we looked at this old theater building in Desert Hot Springs, it wasn't being used. We walked inside. The elders were with me, and it was painted black. All the walls were black inside. And I looked around at the building, and I said, this is the place. And the elders looked at me, are you nuts? What's wrong with you? And I said, this is the right place. It was in the center of town. It looked like the Dickens. That's what the front looked like. But it was the right place. So we ended up buying that building. I was working with local leaders to locate the old building in the center of town. I negotiated the price and the terms of the purchase agreement, designed the renovations and plans, and then organized the volunteers and personally led out in all the renovations.
Did you deal with the city for the loan or with a bank?
It was a personal loan in the sense of we bought it from somebody that owned it. I don't know if the city owned it or what. I don't remember that detail. But when we got done structuring the plan of buying the place, the payments were about $600 a month. And that was what we were paying to rent the Baptist church. And then we started renovating the building. Now, I led the crew, and the crew was about 12 to 15 gentlemen that were 60 to 70 years old. And so they came to me and they said, well, we'll come and we'll help you, but it doesn't take us a whole day to get tired anymore. And sometimes when I started, I would say to them, I've got a Bible study today, but I can't be there, but here's what I want to see you do. And they said, Gary, we'll take the day off like you're taking the day off, and when you show up for work, we'll show up for work. So I had to show up every day, strap on my tool belt, and go to work from 8 in the morning till 12 to remodel that old theater building. It was so funny, the way they did it. I'll have to tell you that in a minute. After 14 years that I was there, we bought the commercial building next door that had 8 rentable units. The church owned 7 city lots, 2 houses that came with the theater building. They were behind the theater building, so we bought them too, and 2 parking lots. The reason that we bought the commercial building next door is the city said that I couldn't do any more additions and renovations on the building until I had more parking, because we didn't have enough parking. So I said, well, we'll buy the building next door. And that's a story in itself. It became available right next door, and I needed the parking lot. So I went next door and I talked to the man about it. He wanted to sell it, but he was dead set against selling it to the church. He said, I won't sell to a church. He wanted $350,000 for the building, which the conference thought it was a steal. It was worth about $1 million. And so I went over and I talked to the man about 6 times, literally, and he wouldn't sell. Then the church said, well, Gary, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to all gather together, and we're going to meet in the theater building that we bought, and we're going to pray about this, that God changed this man's mind. And we want you to go over there while we're praying on the 7th time and ask him again. So I went next door and I asked him again. The man came down with narcolepsy, which is a sleeping disease, and he fell asleep 64 times in a 24-hour period of time. He thought he was going to die. He dropped the price to $150,000, and he says, if you come up with $150,000 in 1 week's time, then I'll sell you the building. So I went back to the church and I said, look, this man's willing to sell us. I can get the conference, call an emergency executive committee to authorize the purchase of this building. They did that. They gave us the authorization. And I told the church members, I want you to give me or loan to me the money that I need to go next door and buy this building, and then you'll all get paid back. You'll have to trust me for that because I know how to do this kind of stuff. So in 1 week's time, they came up with the money. Some of it was loans, some of it was gifts. We got the money. I went next door. I bought the building. And then if you're not familiar with real estate, let me clue you in. When you have a residential property, if you pay $1 for it, it's worth $1 for 1 year period of time. You can't get more out of it. You couldn't get a loan if it was worth $1 million. It doesn't work that way. Residential property is valued for 1 year on the value of what you paid for that property, but not so with commercial property. The commercial property is valued by the leases you have signed on the building. So I ran around and I got all 8 rentable units rented, and I got signed leases on them. I walked into the bank and I said, here, we own this building. I want a loan on the building. They gave me the loan. They said, sure, Pastor Ford, no problem. They wrote the loan for the building. I got the loan on that, secured the building. Now we owned it, and I could pay everybody back. I paid everybody back. Everybody was happy, but the loan was a high-price loan. It was probably a high interest rate. Then I applied to the union to finance the building and got a low interest rate with the union. You can borrow 300% of your tithe base, sometimes in emergency, 400% of your tithe base, whatever it is. And we got the money. I refinanced it at a low interest rate, 15-year loan. We were paying out, I think it was $2,500 a month, and bringing in $4,200 a month. So it was $1,700 a month positive cash flow for the church. It all worked out real smooth and real easy. The church was real happy to have that extra money coming in and all the units rented. We rented it out. One was AA, one was another church, and one was a chiropractor, another was a doctor of some sort. And anyway, they were all rented. It worked out fine. Elder Pennick, the conference president, said it's miraculous what Pastor Ford has accomplished here at the Desert Hot Springs Church. Also, the church renovations were finished. The church was dedicated debt-free. The commercial building was making its own payments, producing $1,700 a month positive cash flow for church ministries. We had a 9K solar system that was installed and paid for on the ceiling of the building, relocating the electric bill reducing the electric bill for the church. The church had $45,000 in their budget when I left. No bills. The average attendance was about 150 to 200% of the membership at the time. So the conference was very happy with me. And the next church was in El Cajon, where I served. When I arrived there in 2004, the church was meeting in the school gym. The church attendance was 105. They had sold their building in town, their church, and they were meeting in the gymnasium out on the school property. There was 10 acres, and they were meeting in the gym and going to build the church on the front 5 acres. The church was operating $6,000 to $12,000 a month in the red. Now, I asked the treasurer, how do you float? She said, well, we sold the building for $1 million, but we're chewing up money real fast. And so I told him, well, that stops now. We don't spend money we don't have. The school enrollment was at 26. Tithe was down 8.3% when I took over the church. The school building was in poor condition in need of major repairs. 4 years later, you see the church. It's the people that are filled in there, and there's the actual building of the church. The new church building was finished within budget, $3.4 million project, 26,000 square foot building. It could seat up to 700 people with the balcony. Average attendance was, when I left, was 250. Sometimes it was up to 450. School enrollment was almost doubled at 48. Tithe was up 12% for all 4 years that we were there. 78% of the $3.4 million debt was paid for before I left. And then 1 year later, they paid the church off. That's paying off $3.4 million in 5 years' time, which is a phenomenal amount of being able to do that. A major upgrade of the school had been completed and paid for. We put in 600 amp service, central air conditioning, dual windows. The roof was insulated, stucco, and fresh paint inside. I talk about that in my third book, Wise as Serpents and Harmless as Doves. Okay, how do you do major fundraising if you want to raise a lot of money, like $3.4 million? Every church is different. You assess the needs and the resources available, then customize a program. Pastors that try and run the same program at every church that they do, 50% of the time they're successful and 50% of the time they're not, because they're trying to run the same program and it might work with this congregation, but it doesn't work with this congregation. So you have to customize it to meet the needs of the local church. Secondly, there's only 2 ways to deal with financial issues. You either plug the holes or you put more water in the bucket. That's the only 2 ways to solve financial problems. And then you have to use visual aids to keep the need before the people. You have to be creative in doing that. I'm going to talk about that. Fundraising details. Well, when I do an assessment, I have to find out the details about the local church a little bit. I have to ask questions. They had already hired the contractor for the building of the program, but they said to me, Gary, because you're coming in as the new pastor and you have to okay everything, do you want to go with a different program? They had the plans already drawn, which I looked over and made sure they were okay. And then what's been done before. You look at both those issues when you're doing fundraising. The contractor. There's only 2 ways to deal with issues, financial issues. One, you plug the holes. Well, I talked to the conference about the contractor, and he had a reputation for spending twice what the budget was. He liked free access to the checkbook, and he had done many churches the conference knew about, and he was always double the budget that he said. And I did not want to end up running the church in the hole. Early on, I like to snuggle up to the treasurer, to have good friends with the treasurer, because I tell her or him, either one, that I want to know if any large donations come in, because I want to know what tickled that person to give. If they give $15,000 for a new piano, I want to know why they gave the money at that particular point in time, because I want to foster that kind of stuff. Frank, you need help? You looking for something?
You had a handout. Where are they?
No, we don't have hands.
I gave it to you.
They're in the office.
They're in the office. He's got a handout of this complete outline. Okay. Yeah, I didn't pass them out because I didn't know where they were once I gave them to you. So I snuggle up to the treasurer and I say, look, I want to know if any large donations come in, they're out of the ordinary. And then I checked out the contractor, and the contractor always went twice the budget. The conference says he's a good man, he knows how to build, but he always runs twice the budget. And I thought, I'm not going to have that happen. So early on in my ministry at that church, maybe 2 months into my ministry there, the contractor was getting started, and he came to the treasurer, and he threw a bill on the desk for $10,000, and there was no backup for the bill. And she called me up and she said, shall I pay this bill? And I said, no, don't pay the bill. Well, it really angered the contractor that I would tell her not to pay the bill. And so I was holding my first board meeting or my second board meeting, whatever it was. I think it might have been the first board meeting. And the elders are supposed to speak up and defend the pastor, but nobody did. The contractor walked into the meeting, interrupted the meeting, and he said to the board, you better straighten out this pastor of yours and tell him what's going on here, because when I submit a bill, you pay it. And you straighten him out to make things run smooth here. And he walked out of the meeting. Well, I waited for a minute to see, you can leave one there, thank you, to see if any of the church members were going to speak up and say anything, and nobody said a word. Now, I'm the new pastor. I'm the new kid on the block. They don't know what I know, what I don't know. So I didn't do anything about it at that point in time. And I finished the board meeting and shut it down, and I went home and I wrote a 3-page letter to the head elder of the church. And it said, I want these questions answered. Who's the boss? Who's running things here? Am I his go-to man? Am I his flunky? Who's running the show here? Do I take orders from him, or does he take orders from me? What does the Bible say? And I gave him references in the Bible to look up. It was a 3-page letter. And I told the head elder, I've got some vacation time. I've lined up speakers for 2 or 3 weeks now. And you folks figure out as a board, you call them together and you go through this sheet and you answer all these questions of who's in charge and who's the boss here. And when I come back, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to talk to you about this and find out who's supposed to be doing the orders around here and who's subservient to who. And so then when you tell me your answer, I'm going to give you my answer. So I came back to the board, I called them back together, and they got together and they said, we researched what you said. According to the Bible, you're in charge. God has put you here in charge of the program that's going on, and we feel like the contractor owes you an apology. Well, he came in and he gave me an apology in front of the board. It was pretty weak, but it was an apology. I should have backed it up with more backing and all this stuff. And he knew from the start I was not going to stand for bills coming in that didn't have backing and stuff like that. And I plugged that hole. So when we finished that project, we came in on budget, not a penny over. Okay, I checked out the plans. He didn't know it, but I've had 4 years of education in high school of drafting. I asked my mom, what's drafting? She said, oh, it's drawing pictures of buildings and stuff. You'll like it. Take it. So I took the first year, introduction to drafting, advanced drafting, architectural drawing, advanced architectural drawing, and I was a skilled draftsman by the time I came out of high school, and I never thought I'd use it. Well, when I got into college, and I had to work my way through college, which is a tough thing when you're low man on the totem pole and you're mowing the grass to be able to go to college. Well, when I needed more funds, I began to pray for an hour each night. And I prayed for an hour on Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night. And I prayed specifically, God, open the doors for a better job. Now, all the good jobs as the dean's assistant were taken. They were the highest paid students. But I kept praying, Lord. And I used to go to work, I don't know if any of you know La Sierra campus. La Sierra campus, on the back of the building up on Two-Bit Mountain, they have the physical plant building. It's a long building, and it has a short hall that comes in, then you go way down to the end for the grounds department where I worked, where I rode in the back of a pickup truck with the gas cans and the lawnmowers spilling gas all over you and getting hot and sweaty. And in that little short hallway, there was a door that was always closed, and it had planning written on it. And after praying Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday for an hour for a better job, that door was open on Friday when I went up there to the physical plant to go to work. And I'd been praying that God would open a door. The door was open, and I looked in, and there was a drafting table there. And there's a second door, and it was open, going back inside deeper. So I walked into the second office, and there's a drafting table there, and there was some plans. And the number 2 man, Jerry Metcalf, was standing over the plans, scratching his head. And I walked in and said, "Hi, Jerry, I didn't know you had a drafting table here." He says, "Yeah, wish I could read this stuff." I said, "What do you want to know?" He looked at me, he says, "You could read these?" And I said, "Yeah." He pointed at something, and I told him what it meant. He says, "You know how to read this stuff and draw these plans?" I said, "Yeah, I had 4 years in high school." He said, "Come back on Monday. I want you to talk to John Clough." Well, John Clough was an Adventist, but he was a crusty old Adventist, and he didn't smile at anybody. But when I showed up for work on Monday, John Clough was sitting there waiting for me to clock in to go to work on the grounds department. He says, "Are you Gary Ford?" I said, "Yeah, come in here." He took me into there, and he said, "Can you read these plans?" Blah, 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 blah. He says, "You're hired." I was the highest paid student on campus. They paid me more than anybody else on campus. They gave me keys not only to my own office, but they gave me keys to the building, and I could come in anytime I wanted to draw those plans for John Clough. I was the draftsman for Loma Linda University at La Sierra campus. And just to show you the difference about what God can do when you pray, when I used to come to work, I would work on the grounds department, and I would go to the grounds department, and I'd get all hot and sweaty, and the gas tipping over on me and stuff like that. But now I showed up to work in a casual suit and a pencil behind my ear, and John Clough would be waiting for me to show up for my work schedule. And he'd say, "Come on, Gary." And I'd get in his air-conditioned truck, and we'd ride around the campus, and we'd stop here and there. He said, "Can you draw this and this?" And I just scribble notes. "Yeah, I can do that. I can do that." I worked my way through school as the highest paid student on campus because God opened the door and blessed me. So prayer does work. But I researched the contractor. I was plugging the holes, and he didn't go over budget. It came in on budget. Now, there's other ways to plug the hole. This is a picture of a copy machine. I was sitting in the office at the church at El Cajon after the church was built. And the secretary, I had a secretary, she called into me one day and she said, "Pastor, I got a notice here that we're supposed to renew the contract on the copy machine. Do you want me to just go ahead and renew it? That's what we usually do." I said, "No, give it to me." So she gave me the contract, and I looked at it, and I checked prices of copies, and there was a problem that we had in the church. The school did not have its own copy machine, and they always had to come over to the church and make copies, and that made a little tension between the school and the church and the copies and all that kind of stuff. And I figured out that I interviewed 16 different copy machine companies, and the copy machine prices had dropped so much that I got 2 copy machines for less money than what we were spending on the 1 copy machine that they had in the office, and the school got their own copy machine. Now, I put a picture in here that my wife had me take out. It was of a woman, young woman, leaning over with her blouse cut really low, and her skirt was really high, and this was the sales representative of the one that wanted us to re-sign the contract. And I thought, are you kidding me? Here I am, a married man, and I'm sitting in here doing my job as a pastor, and you're coming to me thinking you're going to sway my vote towards you because you send out a salesman that has a short skirt and a low-cut blouse? Anyway, I signed a contract for a new copy machine company, got their own company. I was plugging the holes, saving money. Also, when we doubled the size, we were on 10 acres that the school was located on the back 5. We were building the church on the front 5 acres. A good old boy was doing the yard work, and he had been a member of the church a long time, and he was charging too much money for the yard work, and he submitted a bill for double what he was making. And I said, "No, we're not going to do that." They said, "What do you mean? We've always done that." And I got a lot of flack about that. I said, "He can submit a bid for the new contract of the church, the 10 acres instead of the 5 he was caring for. He can submit a bid like everybody else, but I'm going to take bids from licensed, regular, professional people with insurance, and the bids I got were about half price what he was charging, and it was a lot less. And I said, he can submit a bid like everybody else. And they said, no, you have to just give him the bid. I was plugging the holes. I'm not going to do that. I wouldn't do that for my job, and I'd do that with God's money, plugging the holes. One day, the lady in charge of the community services came to me, and she said to me, Pastor, I think it was before my first board meeting or a second board meeting, whatever it was. And she said, Pastor, a long time ago, several years ago, we started a mission down in Mexico. And I've got a letter here from that mission. Somebody left the fire sprinkling water system turned on in the valve in the back, and it ran for a week or so before they figured it out, and they've got a $8,000 water bill, and they want us to pay it, and I'm going to ask the board to pay it since we helped them get started. And I said, well, thank you very much. And I said her name, and I said, do you want to know what I'm going to say? She said, sure, Pastor. I said, well, you know, right now, according to the treasurer, we're going $6,000 to $12,000 in debt every month. And so I'll be happy to write a letter to that mission church and tell them to find the person that left the water spigot on and have him pay the bill, because we're not going to pay the bill. We don't pay bills. We don't run up. We can't pay our own bills. Why would I pay someone else's bill? I wouldn't do it with my money. I'm not going to do it with God's money. Well, that ruffled a few feathers, but I was plugging the holes. You got to plug the holes, or you got to put more water in the bucket. Put more water in the bucket. Okay? Fundraising. I asked the treasurer what was being done in the past. Well, it just so happened just about the time we were about ready to start doing fundraising for the new church to raise $3.4 million to get started, that an offer came in from one of the church members, a young man that was attending our church that was from a very wealthy family, and he could afford to do this. He offered to double any of the offerings that came in during the next month, the month of September, when we were getting started. I had about 10 days, maybe a week before he started this program. So I went to work. Visual aids. You need visual aids whenever you're doing fundraising to keep the people up front informed, and you need to be creative on using your visual aids. Okay? I printed up, now someone had made a model of the new church. You'll notice the picture of the real church up here on the right. This is a business card, just the size of a business card. I took a picture of that model, and I put a rainbow around it, and I made it kind of dressy and look like a dreamy thing. And I printed up thousands of those cards, because you need visual aids to do what you're going to do if you're trying to raise a large sum of money. Okay? Put more water in the bucket. What had been done? So I asked the treasurer, has this gentleman ever come forward and agreed to match funds in the past? Oh, yes. How much did you raise? $3,000. And he wrote us a check for $3,000. I said, okay, thank you for letting me know. I want to know for 2 reasons. Number one, I want to thank him for his generosity. I want to personally go to him and thank him. So I went to him and I said to him, his name was Eddie. I said, Eddie, I want to personally thank you for your generous offer to match any monies that come in during the month of September in next month. And that really is kind of you. Oh, I don't mind doing it, Pastor. I said, Eddie, but I also wanted to let you know that if I get involved, we're going to raise $100,000. Are you prepared for that? He looked at me and he said, Pastor, I know you think you're some kind of hot dog and you might raise $5,000, but that's okay. Whatever you raise, I'll match. And he looked at me. He said, you might get 10 grand. That's okay. It doesn't matter. I can match it. I said, okay, Eddie, I just want to be upfront with you and be fair with you. I'm going to try and raise $100,000. He says, give it your best shot, Pastor. So then I went to work. I had talked to him. I had cleared it with him. Every church is different. You have to assess the needs and the resources, and then you customize a program. Okay? I had to work behind the scenes to get ready. If you're praying about this kind of thing in your church, you'll know when to start. The Holy Spirit will guide you. And I was praying like mad for guidance, and I thought, this is just the opportunity that I need. It's time to start the program. Now, you have to go talk to the heavy hitters, the ones that can donate a lot of money. You go behind the scenes, and you talk to those people that might give you $100,000 or $200,000 or something like that. And you ask them to put their money that they're going to donate. Don't donate it directly to the church while you're making your appeal, but put it in a special fund with the conference. They have funds like that, and it'll be matched. So you're doubling your money. So I talked to the heavy hitters, and I think they put money, $100,000 or something, into that kind of fund. Okay, so you have to remember that the leader has to lead in fundraising. Do the following yourself before you announce it to others. So I did what I was going to ask them to do. And I went to the conference office and I raised a couple $1,000 just by doing what I'm going to share with you, how you raise money. And then I got up front on the first Sabbath of September, and I told the people, I don't want you to give the money while we're raising money. And they looked at me and they scratched their heads, and I said, I'm going to say it again. I don't want you to give the money. I want you to help me raise the money. They said, what are you talking about? I had the deacons poised with thousands of these little cards, and I said, deacons, pass them out. So they began to pass them out, and I said, you take as many as you think you can get rid of. If you want 50, you want 500, I've got them all printed up, and people begin to take these cards. And I said, here's what I want you to do with them. Number one, they hand out the pictures that you make up, and then each $1 equals $4 because you raise $1 and the local person that's going to match it is going to match it, and that's $2. Then we're going to send that $2 up to the conference office and matching funds, and it becomes $4. So every $1 becomes $4. You see, we're using multiplication here to raise the money. Okay? And I told them the strategy, and then I told them of my success. I said, I went to the conference and I did what I'm going to tell you to do, and I raised $2,000 already. They said, what? I said, yes, it works. Okay, the public instructions. This is what I told them publicly I want you to do. Take the picture that I've given to you that you're going to take from the deacons right now, and I want you to take it to everybody you know. Your father, your mother, your brother, your sister, your aunt, your uncle, your cousin, your neighbors, your relative that lives 3 states away. I don't care where you send it. Send them this card in the mail. Secondly, tell them why this is such a cool project. There's going to be lots of room for youth programs. We're going to have youth basketball on Saturday night. Whatever you want to tell them, you tell them why you're excited. And then you ask them for their advice how to do fundraising. And they're going to tell you, have a yard sale, have a bake sale, have a car wash, blah, blah, blah. They're going to tell you all those things. You listen to what they're saying, to their helpful suggestions like you've never heard them before. Then you thank them profusely. Thank you so much for your help. Oh, I don't mind helping you. I'm glad to give you advice. Then you ask them to help you get started with your project by giving a $10 donation. Do you know I had checks coming in from 40 different states? The treasurer sent one of these cards to her friend in Massachusetts. We were in San Diego in the El Cajon Church, and she sent off this card to her friend, and her friend called her on the phone and said, what is this, Emma, that you're sending me? What is this card about? And Emma told her, she had the list in front of her. She said, I did it just like you said, Pastor. I told her all excited how I was to get this new church built and what it was going to do, and I told them all about that. And then I asked her for advice, and she said, have a yard sale, have a bake sale, have a car wash. And I listened, and I thanked her profusely. And then I said, would you mind helping? She was reading from her list. The pastor said, I should ask you, would you mind helping getting started with a $10 donation? And the phone went silent. She said, I didn't know what to think, Pastor. And then the lady on the other end, her friend, said, can I give more than that? And Emma said, no, the pastor said to ask for $10. She says, I guess so. I cracked me up. The lady sent a $2,000 check, and I put her up front waving that check, and it lit the church on fire, and we were on our way. We raised just under $50,000. Eddie matched that 50 and it became 100. We sent it up to the conference matching funds and it was $200,000 in 1 month's time, and the church was on fire. That's why, according to, I was there 4 years. We had the church built in 3 years, $3.4 million. 78% of the debt was paid for before I left. After 1 more year, they paid off all debt, and they flew my wife and I back from Arkansas for the debt-free dedication service. Now, you think about that, $3.4 million debt. It wasn't a rich church, and they paid it off in 5 years. There's a way to do it right, and we did it right, and the people were thankful for that. I was a senior pastor in Arkansas. They asked me to go back to Arkansas to start a television ministry. And they told me I would have 1 or 2 churches, maybe a satellite church. When I got there, I had 4 churches. They weren't really up front with me. When I got there, I had 4 churches. I was a pastor, senior pastor, and they had a local layman leading 2 of the churches. And anyway, it was kind of a mess. They had all the equipment for the television ministry. It was the 5th largest church in the conference, Springdale, Arkansas, and Fayetteville, and. But anyway, the man that started all the television ministries, his name is Rudy Delinsky. He started them all in the Adventist church. He was about 84 years old. He was there. They had all the equipment. All they needed was the speaker. They had heard me speak. And I was invited in 2008 to be one of the presenters at the West Coast of Evangelism that they had in Los Angeles. The union ministerial director asked me to be one of the presenters because I had several books written. And one of the guys from the Arkansas conference, Dennis Shafter, he was the ministerial director, sat through my classes of Bible teaching. And so they flew me back to Arkansas twice, one to teach all the laity. They gathered together at their youth camp, and I taught them how to give Bible studies. And then they flew me back the second time, and I taught all the pastors how to give Bible studies. That's how I got back to Arkansas. Then they offered me a job and said, we want you to come back here and start it. Well, Rudy Delinsky started all Adventist television ministries, and he was starting a television ministry there, and they wanted me to be the director of that. He had a freak accident about 6 weeks after I arrived. He was working on an old pickup truck. If you jump start it with a screwdriver, if the solenoid doesn't work, you cross the 2 things and it jump starts it and it starts running. Well, it was an old truck. It was a stick shift. It was in gear and the key was on. And he jump started it. It caught. The back wheel spun, knocked him down, and then ran him over. And he died about 4 weeks later in the hospital, never recovered. So the television ministry did never get off the ground because the guy that knew how to do it was dead. So we stayed 3 years in Arkansas. When I got there, the church was $2,000 in debt every month, and that had been going on at least 2 years. I didn't check further than that. School enrollment was at 21 students. The school was in debt $20,000 to the church and to the conference because it could not pay its own utilities and bills. The school and the church building was sadly in need of repairs and maintenance. The basic principle, remember, every church is different. You have to assess the needs and the strengths, the resources the churches have, then customize the program. If you try and run the same program, it doesn't work that way. 2 ways to deal with it. What are the 2 ways to deal with financial issues? Plug the holes and put more water in the bucket. That's the only 2 ways to do it. Okay? There they are. And then you have to use visual aids to help the people see the need. Whatever, sometimes a thermometer up front, sometimes a card that you make up like I did in one of the churches. Okay? There was tension between the church and the school for the unpaid bills and the low enrollment. When I arrived, that was one of the problems. The church was located on 10 acres of land. That was good. They had extra land to build. And a portion of the members were from the Marshall Islands, about 75. I think the church was about 250. in attendance, and 75 were from the Marshall Islands. Well, they're wonderful people, and they sing beautifully, but they're poor as dirt. They don't have any money. They had all kinds of kids, but they couldn't send them to our school because they didn't have any money. So we had to figure out a plan that would work for that church. So we decided to start a greenhouse ministry. Now you see the picture of Gavin Porter holding a large tomato. It's almost big as the kid's head. We started a greenhouse. We planted a greenhouse that was 100 feet long and 30 feet wide. It cost me $13,000 to set up that greenhouse ministry, bringing in money and water supply and everything else. And all kinds of students started to come then. Church, we operated in the black for 3 years more. School enrollment was increased. I think it was almost doubled. It was still climbing. The school was paying all its bills and making payments on past debts. Grants, I got $39,700 to build a $13,000 greenhouse. Okay, there's a way to do that. Contracts were negotiated with local stores to buy the tomatoes. The school was remodeled with an office added, and repairs were completed 3 years later. Okay? What are the only two ways to solve financial issues? You plug the holes and you put more water in the bucket. That's the only two ways, okay? So, how do you plug the holes back there? Well, I want you to see this guy in the picture. That's our church treasurer. His name is Cliff Jackson back there. Nice young man. I got to know the treasurer because I like to snuggle up to the treasurer, and then I get information from them, and they clue me in. So I went to visit Cliff to plug the holes. That's normally what you have to do at a church. And I sat in Cliff's home, and I visited with him, and I said, Cliff, I want you to set all the bills right here on the table in front of me that you pay for the church. And he looked at me, and he said, why? I said, because I'm the pastor, and I asked you to do that. He said, okay. He thought about it for a minute. And he went and got the bills, and he sat the stack of bills on the table in front of me. He said, here they are. I said, what's the first bill? He said, it's there. I said, what is it? He said, it's the trash bill. He picked it up, and he looked at it. I said, okay, are there any other companies that empty the trash? How much do they charge you for emptying the trash in this area? He opened the bill, and it was $450 a month. And I said, it's a 2-yard bin, $450 a month. And you said there's 5 companies. I want you to find another company, and I want you to call them on the phone and hand me the phone. So I got on the phone, and I said, how much do you charge to empty every week a 2-yard bin? $250. I said, okay, thank you very much. And I hung up. I said, give me the phone. Okay, we called where they're paying for their trash bill. I got on the phone. I introduced myself as Gary Ford. I'm new pastor of Seventh-day Adventist Church. I understand you folks empty our trash every month. I'd like to speak to the manager. So they put the manager on the phone. I introduced myself again. And he said, how can I help you, Pastor Ford? I said, well, I understand there's other companies. You're charging us $450. There's another company that will charge me $250 to do the same thing you're doing. And so I have a question for you. Do you want to lower my bill to $250, or do you want me to change companies? He said, just a minute. I'll come back in a minute. He went to talk to somebody, and he came back. He says, your bill is now $250 a month. I said, thank you very much. And I hung up the phone. Cliff says, I didn't know you could do that. I said, give me the next bill. I took the telephone bill, and I looked at the telephone bill, and they were paying $26 a month for a fax line. Nobody uses fax lines. Nobody uses fax there. They got email all over the place. Fax is obsolete. I said, we don't pay that bill anymore, $26. I called the phone company. I said, get rid of the fax line. Don't charge us for that anymore. We got rid of that. The next bill was the former pastor's wife. They were paying $1,000 a month to answer the phone for the church. I said, we don't pay that bill anymore. I'm here. I answer my own phone call. They've got call forwarding, and we forward the calls to my cell phone so that all of them are answered, okay? So $1,000 a month. When I got done, we weren't going in the hole anymore. We had plugged the holes, okay? Put more water in the bucket. Well, we started a greenhouse. We planted 460 tomato plants. I told you we got $39,000 money from different sources, 3 different sources, grant money. Grant money you apply for, and you don't have to pay it back. But the problem with that, most pastors don't follow through with grant money. When you get a grant from a company, for example, a company named VersaCare will send you free money, and they give you a grant if you can tie it to a school. The school has something to do with it, so therefore it can be grant money. Anyway, you okay, Frank?
Frank, you can go through the room over there. There's a cord on the right side of the
Okay. So anyway, we got grant money, but you have to send a report a year later what you did with their money. Most pastors don't pay that any attention. Then they won't ever give you money again. Don't do that. Fill out the report at the end of the year. Tell them where you spent their money. Simple. If you apply for union money from the Pacific Union or whatever union you're in, you get the year money they grant you, $5,000 or whatever it is. It's good not for just 1 year. It's good for 5 years. You get the same amount of money if you reapply for it. If you didn't know that, do that. You know, most pastors don't follow up on that kind of stuff. I follow up on it because if I shuffle a few papers, they're going to send me free money to do whatever I want to do. And how do you make money? You plug the holes or you put more water in the bucket. I'm getting money from somewhere else other than out of the church members' pockets. Okay? Did we use visual aid to solve some of the problems? Yeah, you got to use visual aid. Now, how did I do that back there? The Lazarus principle. What's the Lazarus principle that we started with? What human power can do, divine power is not summoned to do. Christ didn't turn to the stone and say, get out of the way, or the angels that were standing beside him. Because human hands could roll away the stone, he asked the humans to do that. Desire of Ages, page 535. Lazarus principle applies here. Now, I want you to look at this picture on the top with a good-looking woman in red. That's my wife, Yvonne. Okay? And I want you to see the little bus there that says Springdale Adventist School Prep School for Heaven.com. We got that address and put it on the side of that. On the front of the bus, leading the way and educating hearts and minds for service, Springdale Adventist School. Now, did we use visual aids to solve the problem? I want you to know where we got that bus from. A church member told me he worked for Sears delivering refrigerators. And I said, what do you do with that refrigerator box when you're done with it? I want you to bring me one of those refrigerator boxes because I'm going to create a bus that the kids can want to get into. I put that bus up in the front of the church all decorated with lights flashing on it. Do you know every kid in the church wanted to crawl inside of that bus when we had the children's story? Are you kidding me? Every kid in the school and the whole church wanted to go to the Adventist school because that's the prop that we put up in the front. Now, did we use visual aids to do what we wanted to do? Yes, you got to do that as a principle when you're trying to do fundraising. Every church is different. You assess the needs. Now, who would the new leader be if you had a greenhouse ministry? People began to ask me that. What did I do? I began to pray, Lord, we need a greenhouse manager. Do you know who showed up in my church? The first time he showed up, his name was Steve Summers. I did not know who the man was. The second time he showed up, I'm right there greeting Steve to the church. This is your second time here. I'd like to get to know you. I'm going to come and visit you. Is that okay? Yeah. So I got in his home and I talked to Steve about what he did. Steve, why are you coming to my church? I'm glad you're here. Well, you know, God impressed me. He had a ministry for me to do, and I didn't know what that was. Well, Steve, what have you done in the past? Well, you know, I've been selling vegetables to high-end restaurants for the last 30 years. Oh, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? God put me together with Steve Summers. So I studied with Steve and I baptized Steve and he became the manager of the Greenhouse Ministry in Springdale, Arkansas. Now, we have to worry about where God's going to provide from? No. What does the Bible say? Doesn't it say somewhere in the Bible that when they were taking the ark across the Jordan, the people leading were the priests, the leaders of the church, and they had to put their feet in the water before the water parted. They had to step out by faith. Sometimes you don't have answers to all the questions you want, but you got to put your feet in the water to get started. Who would the new leader be? It's time to go to our knees and time to pray. God, provide me with a leader for this ministry. Steve Summers was the perfect person. He contacted all his former contacts and he sold tomatoes out of our tomatoes that we raised, 400 and some tomato plants. He got all the contracts signed, and we had money coming in, enough to pay for another 26 students, full price, coming to our school. Pastor of the Monterey Peninsula Church. Attendance, I was there 10 years. Attendance was up 80% from 75 when I started, because the conference tracked the attendance back then. It was 140 plus. The building code said we could put 155 in the building, and we had to set up chairs 3 months out of the year, and we had as many as 198 attending. Tithe was up every year except the 2 years during COVID. It dropped a little bit. It went from, tithe was $235, and it went up to $475 in 3 years, more than doubled. Local offerings were good. We looked for a larger building for 6 years, and that was a chore because some of the people didn't want to sell the building. Other people did want to sell. We worked that out. That's another story, but everybody was on board with that. We had no more room to grow where they were, only 9 parking spaces around the church. If you've been there, people walk for blocks to get in the church. Their school is called the Peninsula Adventist School. The drawings that you see are drawings that I drew. When the school found itself in financial difficulties, I saw that as an opportunity. I suggested we renovate one of the 4 buildings. It was an unused building on campus. It was originally permitted in 1961 as a residence for the principal. But since the school started going downhill and they didn't have the attendance anymore, that was a junk building, and they just put stuff in it. It was like a storage unit. So I suggested that they renovate that 4th building on campus. It was actually called Building 3, as a home for the incoming principal. We had trouble getting a new principal to come in because rents were too high in this area. So what we did is renovate. When it was suggested, I drew up the plans. I happen to be a skilled draftsman. God bless me with that. I worked with the city to get them approved, organized the volunteers from 6 churches, personally led the volunteers 3 to 4 days a week. I worked for 6 months to the day. I asked my wife to schedule a benefit concert to pay for all the renovations. We did that. It paid for them, so it didn't cost the school a dime. Now, the conference has a program where they would send out people to do renovation of a building for you, but then they take all the rent from that building, and I didn't want that. So we did the renovations. Now PAS has a steady income for their on-campus rental, and they get the rental every month from the principal, and the principal gets rent at half price of what the area is, so the principal loves it. Summary of issues to work through. If you buy a commercial building here, what are the tax issues? You don't want to lose your tax status as a nonprofit organization, so you need to look into that kind of stuff and see if it's a building that's another location, a separate lot. You need to look into that. Donna, I asked to personally be here because she's a real estate agent. You can find that out by calling the conference, but those are issues to think about. How do you finance it? Well, it depends on if the numbers work. If you run the numbers backwards and forward and you figure out you can make money on the deal, then go forward with it. Get somebody to look at the deal kind of thing, cut the deal the right way, do creative financing. I had to, in the El Cajon or the Desert Hot Springs Church that's there, I had to go to the people. I had 1 week to raise $150,000, and I just told them money. I told the people, you have to give me $150,000. I don't care if you loan it to me. I'll sign a paper to that effect. I don't care if you loan it to me, give it to me, whatever you're going to do. I have to have $150,000 to go next door. I called the conference, got them to have an emergency meeting. They okayed it. They thought it was a wonderful deal. They thought the building was worth about $1 million if it had been in Riverside or where the conference was. So we got that done. I got signed contracts on all of it because I figured out commercial buildings rated on the contract side, and walked into a bank, got a loan. Then I refinanced it from the union office, and it worked out fine. 15-year loan. Now, I want you to think about the issues involved if you buy a commercial building, because we had to think about these issues back there. If you bought a commercial building right next to your church, and you don't have a building like that, but if you did, what about Sabbath observance? Can you, as a church, own a building where people aren't keeping the Sabbath? We had to struggle with that issue. But the Seventh-day Adventist Church also has another principle that they believe in religious liberty. You don't force people to believe your beliefs. If I have a rental and I have 5, do I tell the people they can't watch their TV on Sabbath because I'm a Sabbath keeper? No, I believe in their religious freedom. Now, I happen to be studying with one of my renters, and I've taken him to church several times. His name is Robert Garcia, and he sent his tithe for the first time today, and I dropped it in the offering for him. So I'm studying with him every week, and one of his goals this year is to be baptized, and he wants to be baptized in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So as soon as he's ready, and we cover his work schedule and keeping the Sabbath and all those issues, and we work through it, you may see him baptized here in Watsonville. But you have to balance those issues, and when you talk to the church, you have to talk about those issues. What about Sabbath observance? What about religious liberty? If we bought a commercial building and they're running a business. Now, what I did, the city said I had to have more parking. So I had to have the parking lot next door to the church, but I had the 8 rentable units. So I wrote into the contract with every person that I got to sign a contract, you may not have a yard sale or an outdoor sale in the parking lot on Saturday because I need that parking lot for my church. And they had to sign a contract that said they would not have outdoor activities on the Sabbath because the parking lot belonged to me. They could use it for their regular business, but they couldn't have an outdoor sale outside. Was it worth it for the Desert Hot Springs Church to do long-range financial planning? They had a 15-year, it's been more than 15 years, they paid off that building. Now they have all that income, $4,200 a month coming in for ministry. The building is paid for. And guess where they put their community service center? Out in the catbird seat right on the corner. That corner rental is no longer rented, but it belongs to the Seventh-day Adventist Community Services, and that's where they feed the people from and people come to as ministry. And they have all that income coming in for their church. Okay? 3 years later, after being there, the church operated in the black. The school enrollment was increased. They were paying their bills and making payments on past debts, grants of $39,000. I can tell you how to do that, how to get money coming in. Greenhouse ministry was established. After I left, I put the first greenhouse in. They added a second greenhouse. They had room for 6 greenhouses. Are you kidding me? The water pipe was already in for it. It was all set up. I showed them how to do it. Contracts were negotiated with the local stores to buy the tomatoes. Now, if you set up a greenhouse ministry, you have 3 kinds of tomatoes that come from that ministry. The A's, the B's, and the C's. The A's are perfect tomatoes, and the local grocery stores will buy them, and you'll make money selling them to the grocery store. We paid for 26 new students to come to the school selling tomatoes to the local stores. Okay? Then you have the B tomatoes that aren't quite perfect. Then you have the C ones that are downright ugly, but they're okay tomatoes. One of the things, if I had stayed, is we would have put a commercial kitchen in that building, and we would have chopped up those tomatoes and made salsa out of them, which could be preserved, and then start putting it on the shelf, which has a longer shelf life than tomatoes, and we could have made more money that way. But we didn't quite get that far along. Okay? Now, the sad thing was, now I cut a door into the gymnasium area into an old closet. Smelled like rat poop, and we cleaned it all up, and we made a school office because the school was meeting in one of the rooms off of the gym. They didn't have their own building. They were renting from the church. They couldn't pay their bills. When I got done, they could pay their bills, but they had a wonderful secretary lady that volunteered her time for the ministry of the school, and the school began to flourish with her there, watching over things, having an office for the school and everything else. After I left, they brought in a young pastor, and he liked the idea that there was a volunteer secretary around, so he pulled her out of the school, destroying the long-term financial plan, and said, I want you to answer the church phone for me. And I thought, how stupid can you be? Don't do that kind of stuff. Okay? But we'll get to that. Should you build a greenhouse? Well, who would run it? You have to look for the right opportunity. You have to be praying. You have to figure out if that fits your church. Okay? These are just options and possibilities. What does it cost? It costs $13,000. It did that back then, which was several years ago, to set up a greenhouse. You can buy greenhouse kits, 100 by 30 with foldable walls that go up. You have to look into that. Where would you put it? You have to answer all those kind of questions. Was it worth it for the Springdale Church to do long-range financial planning? Yeah. They almost doubled the size of their school. What's the right course of action for Watsonville? You'll have to think about that. Begin to brainstorm. Begin to look into options and possibilities of what you could do. Don't be afraid to brainstorm about the possibilities. And then I ask the question, is anything too hard for God? God asked that question of Abraham. When Abraham said, well, you know, your wife's going to get pregnant. He's 100 years old. He's going to have a son. His wife was, 90 or 95 years old. And God said, is anything too hard for God? Nothing's too hard for God. He can solve the issues. In a book called Desire of Ages, page 330, it says these words, worry is blind and cannot discern the future, but Jesus sees the end from the beginning. Our Heavenly Father has 1,000 ways to provide for us of which we know nothing. In college, I prayed, God opened the door, and He made me the highest paid student on campus as the draftsman for Loma Linda University, La Sierra campus. So God can do that. What does it mean to be made in the image of God? I think part of what it means is that God wants us to be like Him, creative. He wants us to take an old refrigerator box and paint it up and make it look like a bus that kids can crawl into. Be creative. He wants us to use our hands to do those kinds of things because you need visual aids. If you had a bus like that and the kids wanted to come up and crawl inside of it, suddenly kids will come to school to get in the little bus. And then they want to go to the school. Okay? Recommendations and questions. First of all, I would recommend you begin to pray for guidance in this area. Begin to ask God. Give me thoughts about what to do, what not, as a leader here. What we could do, what we can't do. Don't put judgment on them. Just brainstorm and something will pop and something will come up. Secondly, don't be afraid to ask questions. Now, the picture you're looking at is the Scranton, Pennsylvania church. Okay? When I took over, I was not ordained. I mean, this is years ago, 40-some years ago, that I was pastor of this little church, Scranton, Pennsylvania. Now, if you could still see it, they've got a parking lot to the left of that building right now, but it used to be a blank, vacant building. Okay? And when I got there, maybe the first or second board meeting, I began to ask about what is this payment on the financial statement? It was a payment on this vacant building next door. I didn't know that they were making payments on a building they weren't using next door. So I said, who's got the keys to this building? I want to see this building. I went over and I went through the building and I looked at the building. They were always fussing about two things. We need a building for our Pathfinders. We need a building for our fellowship hall, and we don't have it. And I thought, well, you got this building sitting next door you're making payments on, and you're not using it. Are you kidding me? Well, it's not done, Pastor. The kitchen cabinets were purchased and sitting in the kitchen on the floor. The toilets were purchased and sitting in the bathroom unhooked up. So what did I have to do as pastor? Suddenly I went to a finished carpenter that happened to be a member of the church, and I said, could you hang some cabinets for me? We've got some cabinets that need to be hung. Sure, Pastor, I'll be happy to do that for you. I went to a plumber in the church. Could you hook up a couple toilets for me? Yeah, we got a work bee going. Some of the people began to sweep the floors and clean it up, and then suddenly the light bulb goes on for the church members. Hey, we got a place for the Pathfinders to meet. We got a place for community services. We got a place for, and they're making payments on a vacant building they're not using. I said, are you kidding me? Don't be afraid to ask questions about things if you don't understand, and figure it out, and the right opportunity will pop. Is this concept of long-range financial planning right for this church? You have to decide that. if there's benefits worth looking into. Is there a need that you have? You know, one of the things I hate is hand-to-mouth ministry. I don't want to stand up front in a church and say, please give another $1 today because we need more money for this and more money for that. Why not have a plan? Doesn't God tell us to plan ahead? We plan ahead for the second coming. We plan ahead for our life. We plan ahead for many things. God wants us to do a little bit of planning, I think, for church ministries. In these churches where I've left them, in the Desert Hot Springs Church, they got $4,200 a month coming in, cash flow. We've got electric panels on the roof that cut their bill from $800 a month down to about $200 a month. It was all the roof space we had, but we put an 8K system up there on top. If you decide to develop a long-term plan for your church, I have a recommendation. Vote the plan at a business meeting for a couple of reasons. Number one, so the whole church is on board and they're supportive of the concept and the idea. Number two, well, number two is supposed to be up there. All right, I didn't put it in. I put it in, maybe it got deleted. Number two, if you vote your long-term financial plan through a business meeting, it takes a business meeting to adjust that plan. I tell you the sad story. After I set up Desert Hot Springs, they invited me back to Desert Hot Springs a year later for a special service, and they wanted all the former pastors to show up, and I showed up. And I looked at one of their bulletins, and it said they needed to raise $9,000 a month to pay their bills. And I said, what is this? I asked one of the leaders of the church, and they said, well, the pastor that came in after you was a great spender. And he spent all that money you left us on this and that and everything else. And when we were in debt, he took a call and went somewhere else 6 months later. And I thought, how crazy. Don't do that. If you vote a financial plan through a business meeting, the pastor may tweak it. He may encourage you to change it a little bit this way or that, but he can't destroy the plan and spend all your money and then take a call somewhere else and leave you in debt. Okay? It means you take ownership of where you're going in the church. Does that make sense? Okay. Questions? Any questions that you have? Our meeting's over. I just wanted to share all these things with you to give you ideas and give you thoughts about what could be done and what couldn't be done. Okay? Questions? Let me ask you a question. Is this information helpful? Okay? Get you thinking about things? Yes?
Considering the prices of properties in our areas, what do you think is realistic?
Well, what's realistic is what works. On a personal note, I've been buying houses at half price all my life. Okay? And when I came to this town in Monterey, in this area, I told church members that. You know what they told me? You can't do that here. I live on 8 acres, 4,100 square feet. I have 7 bedrooms and 7 bathrooms. My wife and I live in 2 bedrooms in half the house, and we rent out 5 bedrooms. It's like the Ford Motel. Nobody comes into our part of the house, but every month they put money in my bank account, and we paid off a 30-year mortgage in 7.5 years. So you ask me, what is possible? We serve a God that anything is possible. And you never know what opportunity will open up. I used to get, as pastor of the Monterey Peninsula Church, every 2 months I'd get somebody calling me that would say to me, Pastor, you're pastor of the Monterey Peninsula? I said, yeah. I'm moving to that area, and I'm trying to find a room for rent with maybe one of your church members and maybe $200 a month. And I said, well, I need to kind of tell you what things are like. It's expensive here. And I don't know if anybody will rent you a room for $200 a month. If you go on Craigslist and you look for a room, it's $60 a night to rent a room around here. So you multiply that times 30 days and you get what the standard rental rate is for a room. You'd be lucky to find a room for $800, $900 a month. I rent out rooms for bedrooms for about $1,000 or more a month. And I take that extra money and I put it on the mortgage. 2 years before I retired, my house was paid for. So I still have an income as a pastor, but I don't have to work for it. God has really blessed me. So to answer your question, the blessings are out there. And people tell you they can't be found. I'm here to tell you they can be found. You're welcome to come over to my house and walk my property. I own the mountain behind me. And we have 5 rentals. We have a vacancy about every 2 or 3 years. Somebody may have to move, their job moves them or whatever. And we have no trouble renting out our 5 units, and our income is very steady, just like my paycheck used to be, and it's more than my paycheck was as a pastor. So if you look for the possibilities and you pray, God, guide me. Now, when I used to buy houses, and I quit buying because when we found this house, because we moved every 18 months I've been married 28 years to my wife, we moved every 18 months. We would take our U-Haul boxes and collapse them instead of throwing them away, and they stacked literally 8 feet tall in our storage shed or our garage. And we'd get them out when we moved, and we'd open them and retape them up, and they were marked this way and that and retaped. We burned them all when we bought that house and moved in because I quit buying houses at half price. I know how to do it. If you don't know how to do it, I'm happy to share that information that anybody that wants to know. The houses are there. And when I bought my house, the going rate by the square foot in Prunedale was $350 a square foot. I got it for $175 a square foot, and it's tripled in value since then. So I believe the deals are there. I know how to find them, and I don't know what would work for this church. You don't have a commercial building next door. You got a mobile home park next door. I don't know if it's for sale. You got this, you got this. I don't know what's around here. You'll know more about that than I do on the real estate market. But the deals are there. And I have found them all my life. One of the things Yvonne and I do before we buy a house is we kneel down and pray. And we say, Lord, if there's one house out there, you know where it is. Help us find it. And I may look at this house and this house, but buy the house across the street. You're looking for the worst house in the best neighborhood. And I could tell you story after story after story where I would buy a house in Rancho Cucamonga and make $30,000 in 3 weeks' time. The deals are there, and you just have to know how to find them. I know how to find them, but I don't know what's here, and I'm not looking right now. But you have to be open to the possibilities, and you look, and you find things, and you hear about something. I've been told by a real estate appraiser that my house is an albatross because it's got so many square foot and 7 bedrooms and 7 bathrooms. My wife used to tell me, Gary, stop buying such big houses because I'm tired of cleaning all the bathrooms. And here I buy a house that has legally 7 bathrooms. Now, legally, it's a 5-bedroom home, but it has a granny flat and it has a second living room that we made into a bedroom, put a closet in it, and it's now a bedroom. 7 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms. It's sealed off from our space. Nobody comes in our space. They all come in from the outside. We put a countertop in, 6 foot long, a microwave oven that does 3 things, air fryer, whatever. We put a hot plate in and a refrigerator and say, use the bathroom sink, and it rents a kitchenette, $1,000 or more. So, like I said, we paid off a 30-year mortgage in 7.5 years. You can do the same. If you need help doing creative financing, I think outside the box. I did when I bought that house for Desert Hot Springs, and I do that. I've done that with churches, with the Peninsula Adventist School. They didn't know how much it would cost. I drew the plans for them. I've got a little software program. Every house I own, I draw the plans for. Now, I don't do it like I used to do with the drafting equipment. I've got a little software program. It's a real simple program. It cost me $60 when I bought it. Might be $300 now. It's called Punch Software, architectural drawing. You draw 4 lines of a house, and it puts the walls up. You put the pitch of the roof, and it puts the roof up. You put the windows on it, and it looks like a house. It's plans that can be printed out, either large scale to be submitted to the city, or small, and every city accepts them. They redline them, and you have to change something this way and that, make the footers different. It draws the elevations. One touch of a button, it puts elevations in there, and you have all the elevations drawn. You draw the plans, you submit them. I did that for Peninsula Adventist School. It was accepted, approved, stamped. Here's your plans, go to work. And then we renovated it and made that old house, it was a 2-bedroom house, into a 3-bedroom house. We added another bathroom to it, and it made a nice rental for the school, for the principal. So I look for things with potential and possibilities. Talk to people, have that mindset open in your mind about what's a possibility, what's an option. So I'm not trying to force something on you, and I make no money from the deal. I'm sharing information with you, things that I've done that have worked and have helped churches, and I want to be helpful. Okay, other questions? Greg.
I've heard the story about VHM and its plan to put in teachers' apartments.
I heard that they lost some money to a contractor. That's, huh?
100,000, I heard.
To me, that's poor business dealing. In my opinion, it would not have happened on my watch, because I would make sure we didn't go down that thing. Just like I made sure that contractor didn't charge me twice and go over budget when he threw the first bill on and the treasurer called me, shall I pay this? I said no. And I took his heat, and I made sure that the board and everybody else, and I told them, you make your decision when you answer these questions, and then I'll tell you what my decision is. They didn't know whether I was going to walk away or what. I'd only been there 2 months or something. But they straightened it out, and it flew right, and the guy never overstepped again, and we came in on budget.
I don't know if they recouped any of that.
I think what I heard, the conference attorney is doing something with it. I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
It was a foolish mistake.
yeah, you don't make those kind of mistakes in business, in my opinion. You cover your backside and make sure.
Apart from that, what do you think of the project?
I don't know a lot about it. I just heard they lost money on a deal with a contractor. That's all I heard. So I don't know the details.
What do you think of having 2 apartments for teachers on the campus?
I think it's a wonderful idea, because then they're paying money as long as they don't have someone else do it and they lose the rents. If you want the rents. Now, there's ways to raise money and pay for that kind of stuff. In my church in Monterey, we brought in Jamie George, a violinist, if you know him. He raised $16,000 in one night with my church coming out. He took his cut, $3,000 off the top, and wrote a check to the school for $13,000. Are you kidding me? They would have a fall festival and maybe raise $5,000. We raised $13,000. Let's do it up big if we're going to do it and do the right thing. You see what I'm saying? It's like me preaching in evangelistic meetings, and the handbill brings me 20 people. If I modify the handbill and it brings me 200 people, it costs me the same thing. Let's get the 200 rather than the 20. Just do it right. Think it through. That's the kind of stuff I do. Okay? I figure that's part of my job, is to fill out applications for grants and find you the money. The money's out there. All that kind of stuff can be figured out. Okay, quiz time. What are the only 2 ways to solve financial problems? Plug the holes and fill the bucket with more water. That's right. So keep that in mind, because that will help you as you face different issues. How can I plug the holes? We didn't need the fax line for $26. We didn't need to be paying the former pastor's wife $1,000 a month. We didn't need to pay the gardener double, and he was already charging me too much. He could put a bid in like everybody else. I got flack on that. Oh, but you have to pay him. He's a good old boy. No, I don't have to pay him. You see, I wouldn't do that with my money. I'm not going to do it with God's money. So that we save money, I plug the holes. The contractor, I talked to many people about that contractor, and when he threw the bill on, the treasurer didn't pay it. She called me because I had a relationship with her and said, shall I pay the bill? And I said, no. And I took the heat. But I straightened him out. He knew who was boss. Okay? I pray that this will be a blessing to you and help you as you go out and you begin to think God can open the doors for you to find the right thing. If it's right for here, and like I said, I don't make any money on the deal. Now, I'm writing this information up in a new book. It's going to be called Multiplying the Loaves and the Fish. Jesus did that. These are principles I'm going to talk about in my book and write it down. I talked about it some in my 3rd book, Wise as Serpents and Harmless as Doves, the stuff that I did in El Cajon. I wrote it down and published that as a book. Okay? Okay. Any questions further? I appreciate you coming to the meeting. Let's pray as we close. Thank you, Lord, for your leadership in our lives. We ask for your blessing in all that we do. Help us to demonstrate to you that we are created in your image, that we're willing to be creative in all that we do and do the things that we can do, and then ask for your blessing on top. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you.
Oh, God bless you. Like I said, I hope it's a blessing. All of you are welcome to visit me in my home. You've already been there. You've already been there. You're welcome to come anytime you want. Call me up. Come by and visit. We'll walk up the mountain on Sabbath afternoon. We have people coming over, and we walk up the mountain. We